This is the Men's Room Podcast, where relief is your duty and your innate self is welcome. I'm your host, Ish Mendoza, and I am stoked that you stopped by. Happy New Year to you all. 2024 is upon us, and man, what a crazy year we got through with 2023. So many ups and downs for me personally, but I can say a lot more ups than there were downs. And really happy to keep this thing moving along with you all, onward and upward. And what a treat we have in store for the very first episode of 2024. We're going to be sitting down with the filmmaker, the legendary man, David Orozco, and we're going to be getting into his creative process, getting into some really deep topics, talking about feelings, talking about mental health and therapy, and also talking about David's time working for Bitwise. If you are from the Fresno area, you know that Bitwise is a really hot button topic, and just happy to have shared that with David. And if you're not already doing so, please don't forget to like, subscribe, engage, comment. Any way that you can share and get this out to the rest of the world is really much appreciated. And I just am super excited for the rest of the year to connect with you all further and to bring some really, really great episodes and guests along the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm here with the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. David Orozco. Orozco. How do you introduce yourself?
The people of Hispanic descent are probably going to judge me for this, but I think our Americanized last name is Orozco.
David Orozco.
Perfect.
There we go. I want to be true to your brand, and also true to how you introduce yourself to others too. But I typically like to start off by just asking questions about like the elements that make you, more so than, a lot of people, you go to a cocktail party, you introduce yourself. What do you do is probably one of the first questions that comes up, but I want to get a little deeper than that.
Yeah.
But before we do so, we have kind of an ongoing segment that we call Weapon of Choice. And so I whipped up a nice little cocktail. You turned me on to, you made mention that you're a gin fan, and Negroni is our favorite cocktail of gin drinkers, aside from like gin and juice, gin and tonic, all the other stuff that comes with it too. But I love a good Negroni, and so I whipped up a batch, and I love that you're also a gin drinker. Let's set the scene here. You go to a cocktail party, someone asks you who you are, what do you do? But I want to get deeper to that. Who is the real David? Like, I don't want to get like cheesy about it, but like, what are the things that make you like unique, and the elements that that you have about you that's unique to yourself?
I mean, I think the first one is that we already have is that I'm a gin drinker and a Negroni drinker. So there's a good chance that I'm going to have one of those in my hand at the bar or the cocktail party, whatever it is. These days, I think a lot of my who I am and my identity is dominated by, I mean, as everyone is, like, by what they do. And me in particular, I guess I could say I work in marketing. I usually am using a camera of some sort. But I think bigger than that, I'm a creative. I'm just a creative person. I'm somebody who as a male, and this tends to not be, at least in my experience, talked about as much, or at least as societally accepted. I'm a male who tends to feel things really deeply. And the caveat, or I guess not a caveat to that, but the result of that is that I need to make things out of those feelings. And for me, it wasn't born out of like social media, out of me wanting to start a business or anything like that. Those things came eventually. But for me, I need to do that to essentially just release those feelings. I'm just a feeler. And it's something that I need. Creativity is something that I need as much as I need to breathe. And I think that that's something that's probably the thing I think that I identify with as the most. I'm also a husband. I'm a dog dad to two fantastic dogs. But I think that's probably, would sum up, the majority of who I am.
You brought up a good point that as men, we typically don't defer to like the feelings based aspect of things. I have a question. Why is that? First of all, in your opinion, why do you think that is? But also like how does that manifest itself within you? I mean, obviously you have the outlet of being in that creative space to do so, but has that been how has that kind of been for your navigation for your life? Because I would imagine that this is not a new thing that you discovered about yourself, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not a new thing as far as like knowing that I was that person, but it is, I think, relative to that, a new thing as far as accepting that. And what I mean by that is like, and then we're going to get into my whole life story right here.
Yeah, let's let our head down and
Total therapy session. And this is something too, like is in recent years, like I've reflected on and I've kind of learned to be able to articulate a little bit better. But as a kid, like I was that sensitive kid, that sensitive little boy. And I was able to cope with that by being good at sports. I was good at sports. I was decently smart in the classroom. Like I was a great test taker. And so like I was able to get good grades. I was good at sports. And so I didn't really have to, the feelings kind of thing wasn't, it was masked by, oh, David is great at basketball or David is great at achieving good grades. And really it comes down to achievement. And so it was a struggle really I'm this male, this young boy becoming a young man, trying to learn how to cope and deal with these things. And I'm not given a guidebook. And I love my parents and they did the best that they absolutely could, but their generation was only given so much. And I think that any parent can only do so much. And at some points you're probably going to fall short. And that's, I think that's kind of par for the course for life in general. And that's up to the human being, that person to kind of learn who they are. And so I coped with achieving, with perfectionism and being good at those things. And that got me accepted. That got me friends. It got me liked. And it wasn't until really I graduated college that I decided there were moments where I started to kind of like take control of that and try to become, I think, who I really, really ended up being, or who I'd always been. And that was a creative, sensitive person. But it wasn't really until after college that I think I did that. I graduated and then I'd spent 4 years in a degree in science. I was a biology major and majored in anatomy and physiology. And I decided that I didn't want to do that. Like I was pre-med and
nice.
I didn't want to become a doctor after that. I probably picked that route because people look at doctors a certain way.
Sure.
And they admire them and I'm smart enough to do that. And so why not? I'm kind of interested in science. So let's give that a shot. And I did. And I remember sitting in my graduation, having a panic attack and thinking like, what am I doing? Like, what did I do the last 4 years? Like, was this really for me? And even then after that moment, I still didn't make the decision immediately to take a left turn. I spent a little bit of time and eventually made the choice to become a photographer and start a business and do all that. But it was a struggle to get up to that point. And it was a building of like the courage to be able to take control of my own life and really just be who I wanted to be in spite of who I thought that other people wanted me to be.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about who we are innately, because I think that a lot of times we don't have the opportunity to kind of discover that in ourselves. And to be quite honest, like it's a really fortunate thing that you were able to kind of find that in yourself as well, because some people go years, decades, their whole life without ever being their authentic self. And so the tagline, it's a half joke, but it's truly something that I really want to establish with this podcast is our coming with our innate self. So whatever comes naturally, whatever comes, whatever's at the forefront of what we think and believe is how I kind of want to do things. There's a lot of things, and the reason why I kind of poke and probe specifically about the things that make up you is because I really want to hear the story about who you truly are, and all the things that make up the environment, the culture, all these things that shape you. And even though these things are ever changing and always evolving, it's really good to hear that there's a success story that kind of came out of that. And success it is, because I've been following your work. You and I think we met through some mutual friends, ironically on a podcast, right? I think it was maybe the first time we met with the.
Wow, yeah, dreamers that do. I think.
Yeah. So that was years before podcasts were. It was kind of state of the art,
Yeah, man.
But since then, knowing that you were a creative and a career creative at that, I've followed your work. And I'm a huge fan. I really love your aesthetics. You do a lot of things from my untrained videographer eye. All these things. The way I can sum it up is I like your dark tones in a lot of things. I see that in a lot of the way you tell stories and shoot your videos too. So, is that am I making any sense with that at all? Is that something you go for? Or?
So for context, this actually comes from a place, and I think this is important for me to share that leads into this. Okay. And that is that I wasn't always a creative. And I talked about choosing creativity and choosing to be a photographer after I graduated college. After I had graduated high school, and I'm probably going to date myself here, but like 2009, 2010, I'm in college, my first semester. I taken 18 units of science. And at the end of that semester, I remember coming home from the gym and like my heart was racing, which is normal. Like you go to the gym, you work out, and like you get your heart rate up. Mm-hmm. But I sat down on the couch and it just wouldn't stop. And so this moment kind of sparked the moment of, this was my first, what I would later find out, like panic attack. And I developed anxiety due to a lot of different things, in major part because I wasn't living the life that ultimately I wanted to. And I wasn't making choices that were aligned with who I was. And so fast forward a little bit of time after I sort of get my feet underneath me, I had debilitating anxiety. I didn't want to leave the house. I had to relearn how to do things. And I needed a way to express like what the heck was going on. Well, the year before I had taken a photo class, my senior year of high school. And it was just something like, oh, I need to take an elective, and it's either ceramics or photography. And like, sorry, ceramics. I'm not good with my hands. It's just not me.
No vases or vases.
Yeah. And I loved it. And so in that moment of anxiety and stress and just kind of panic, I turned to photography to kind of express what I was going through, because I couldn't do it with words. And so in that time, I mean, naturally to put out a photo that's light and airy doesn't really align with a period of stress and anxiety. And so photography for me was a way to articulate and express my feelings and what I was going through in that moment. And so it came out of a need, and it has remained that way. I was always scared that maybe at some point that would stop, but it hasn't. I've at some points it's ebbed and flowed, but it's a practice that I need. Like I said earlier, like I just need it as much as I need to breathe, because I'm not the best version of myself if I'm not having some sort of art practice.
Yeah.
And so that ties in with like, that's just so ingrained in my story that it just doesn't feel authentic for me to be creating work for me that is not light and airy. And I started out as a photographer. And I worked my way into filmmaking and was just curious about that. And that kind of thing transitioned into that. And of course, like I'm interested in stories of people who have gone through mental health issues and who maybe are going through that kind of thing or just have feelings about things because we're human and that's part of our experience. So it doesn't really answer the technical question, like why does my work come out moody? But it ultimately like is I can make something light and airy, I can make something moody, I can make something in between, but ultimately it's really about telling a story. And I think I just like to tell in my own time. I like to tell those stories that resonate with me, and those tend to be like when people really sit down and talk and kind of divulge and are vulnerable about like what really goes on in their mind and their heart.
Yeah, and I think it. I liken it to someone that's an artist of other outlets. The way they a musician will maybe potentially, depending on how they feel, their mood it'll be evident in the way they write songs
Yeah.
and things like that as well. I want to talk about like your filmmaking aspect of things, because videography, photography, that's an element in itself. Like you're creating a content for someone or yourself in that way. But how does like filmmaking and directing and all these things, how does that play into the bigger picture of things?
After being a photographer for a few years, like I was curious about filmmaking. Part of it was like a business minded decision because I was still a wedding photographer, and a lot of couples, like wedding videos are a thing, and but that tends to take a backseat to wedding photos. And so I was curious about video, and then I was just like, well, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could learn this and offer this to couples. But I was also just curious for myself, because video and filmmaking for me is just, it's not that one is better than the other. But filmmaking just creates a more detailed world. Photo, I think you can capture a beautiful moment, and that's great and serves a purpose. But filmmaking, you can create a whole world and really immerse people within that and keep them there.
There are elements of like a film or a movie or something that I'll see that there's something about it that I can't like articulate or express in that way. So I'm wondering, like, what inspires you, like, from a creative perspective? Is there a certain filmmaker or a certain director that you watch, or is there a certain like thing, like a song even or something like that inspires you to do that, to do something, I should say?
As far as like favorite filmmaker, this one I feel like is a bit of a cliche answer, but he's just fantastic. And that is Christopher Nolan. Okay. Christopher Nolan, I love his work. Obviously now he's become a really prominent filmmaker. Specifically Interstellar, because Interstellar combined a lot of the things that have been a part of my life, science, and also it's a very emotional film.
Yeah.
And to blend those two things together is not an easy thing to do. So as far as filmmakers that inspire me, definitely. And the way that he likes to play with time and it not necessarily in a linear fashion is also really cool and really innovative. As far the other part in this that I feel like you're kind of touching on is kind of like the creative process, essentially, like what exactly inspires me. And that one is kind of a can of worms. I guess normally for me, it will be a feeling. And I guess the best way for me to describe this is probably to use an example. Recently, I've gone through a bit of a change in my employment. I was actually working a 9 to 5, and we ended up getting suddenly laid off. And so for the last couple of months, this happened. I guess it's coming up on 3 months ago now.
Yeah.
And so for the last 3 months, I've been kind of processing that and going through the feelings and trying to make out how I feel about that and making sure that I go through the motions that I need to in order to essentially release these, to grieve this loss of this job. And the other day I was journaling, and journaling tends to be a really like fantastic practice for me as well. And it just helps for me to put my thoughts onto paper and to really kind of organize them and articulate them better. But I was journaling and I was going through kind of what I was feeling that day about everything that had happened and how it's transpired since. And I just got this image in my head, but sometimes it's a single image, sometimes it's just a moving image. And I saw me, I like to play with like projector work and like kind of cool, moody lighting type of thing. I saw myself with like words on my chest, and then it was either at the time, I'll be honest, I saw the title of the company, the name of the company on my chest, and I saw like camera pushing in, and then just a quick flash of all of the memories of my time at that workplace. And it stuck with me in that moment. And this part, I think, in the creative process is really critical, because sometimes you have that idea and then you end up not doing anything with it. And so to take that first step is sometimes it feels like a mountain to do that. But I remember the next day, like I just started with filming that first frame of it, and then it slowly kind of pieced itself together. And sometimes they come out like exactly how I see them, and a lot of times they don't. This one I ended up posting just a couple of days ago, and I personally love it. It was something that I made for me. I didn't make it for attention. I didn't make it for likes, and I just needed to make it to kind of like put that to rest.
Sure.
And really release those feelings. And so sometimes it comes from journaling. Sometimes it comes from a feeling, really my own life experience. Sometimes it comes from music. Music makes you feel a certain way, but then usually in my brain just sees images. That's just how I work.
That's awesome.
And but it can come from really anything, like a moment in a film.
Please, we can talk as little or as much as you'd like to talk about. So I've been following along with your, I don't know if it's a series, but your unemployment, your video, your content that you've created around that. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think sort of what's in the zeitgeist right now is one of the things that, so I'll talk as an outsider first. One of the things that's hit me, and the reason why it's hit me is my day job is I work in the technology industry. I work for a software company, and I really loved what was happening in the Central Valley with this idea of Bitwise. Bitwise being this company that just came in and had this idea of, being supporting underdog cities like Fresno, like the Merceds, the Bakersfields of the world. And really trying to emerge this industry of technology that existed, that didn't exist in these cities. So it was heartbroken to hear that things didn't transpire as we had at all had hoped. Even for us that were rooting from afar.
Yeah.
You being sort of in that world, I want to talk about how you feel about it. What transpired in that. And now that you're on the outside, retroactively looking back, what are the things that come to mind when you think back about your time at Bitwise?
Yeah, this is a huge part of my story. And again, with like context for this, I'd been working on, I'd had my own business. I was freelancing. I was shooting wedding stuff. I was shooting commercial, business to business kind of thing. A pandemic happened, and that changed a lot for the wedding industry, for obviously for industries everywhere around the world.
No one was getting married at the time.
Yeah. And so that was kind of a hectic time to be a wedding photographer. And I'd already wanted a change out of that. And there were very few places that I was willing to take a 9-to-5 job with after having been self-employed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those places was Bitwise Industries. And the reason for that was because, like you said, they created such a culture around everything that they did that it wasn't like a typical workplace where you go, you're an employee number, and you meet your quotas, you meet your employee performance reviews, and you try and get your raise, and you go home and you are just begging for the weekend every week.
Yeah.
And Bitwise wasn't like that in a way where they really cared about you as a human being. They offered that was evident in the things that they offered. So unlimited PTO was always something that was a talking point for most people in traditional jobs. In the tech world, it tends to be more of a common thing, but you were offered unlimited PTO. As long as you got your work done, you could take time off as needed. If you needed and were going through mental health problems, there were resources for that. You could take time off for that. They really supported you as a human being. And it just seems like a place where there were things going on. It was something in Fresno that we weren't accustomed to in all of the best ways. And so I was offered a job there the beginning of 2021. And I was in talks with them at the beginning of 2021. They had approached me, and I ended up accepting a job in the middle of 2021, I think about June. And it was what I was looking for at that time, as far as a change.
Okay.
And so I ended up being the media production manager for Bitwise. And basically, I got to do everything that I had already been doing just with a team. And I got stability in that moment after coming from like incredible instability via the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so it served a purpose at that moment in my life. And like, even like to equate this to even my own ideas, like in my head, they're perfect. And a lot of times when I start to create them, they end up being very imperfect. And I think that's a good way to describe Bitwise, at least my first experience of Bitwise, because it was this fantastic idea. It was a tech company that was devoted to training people who wouldn't normally get a chance at the tech world in lower income areas and underserved communities. And the idea there was to train them and potentially give them the skills to be able to exponentially increase their income and provide opportunities for them, whether it was within Bitwise or using those skills elsewhere. Also, Bitwise offered real estate options where you could lease out spaces within their buildings. They would take blighted buildings in a lot of times downtown cities, and you could, as a business, lease out those spaces.
Yeah.
And so everything seemed great as far as like on the outside. On the inside, obviously people are imperfect, and it's a growing tech company and it's growing incredibly fast. And so we're trying to cope with so many different things that are going on. And in that way, things were imperfect because we're always altering processes, or maybe even at points like installing processes where there were none, and procedures and protocols, and sometimes needing to pivot to accommodate changes that were going on in the world. I will say that over the pandemic, they did not lay off a single person. And so that spoke volumes about, I think, who they were at that time, or at least who I thought that they were. And so then fast forward 2 years later on, there were, I think, warning signs looking back, hindsight 2020 kind of thing.
Yeah.
But come Memorial Day, we ended up getting a urgent meeting email, and lo and behold, we're told that 100% of the workforce was going to be furloughed. And so that was it wasn't it was a shock.
Yeah.
A lot of us had no idea what was going on. And then eventually we would end up getting laid off. And so that was a very traumatic thing. It's still ongoing. They filed bankruptcy, and we're still going through the processes that are there as far as legally. And there have been so many different headlines that have come out since then regarding what was really what really was going on as far as the financials within Bitwise that I wasn't privy to, that the vast majority of the employees weren't privy to and weren't made aware of.
I want to know, for the first question that popped into my mind is, I'm curious about like the scene. Can you set the table? Like when you got that email, were you at home? Did you jump on a remote call? Were you in the office? How was How was that for you personally?
So it was on Memorial Day. So I specifically was in my car with my wife. We were driving to a friend's house, and I saw the email, and we pulled over on the side of the road and jumped on the call, and then so I got the news there. And in that moment, like at that point, we made the decision like we're not going to our friend's house. I need a moment to kind of gather my thoughts and to figure out what are my next steps that I need to do to make sure that my family is okay. And it was essentially survival mode for that moment. A few things that I needed to do, and once those things were done, then we were kind of okay for the most part. I mean, there's been so many. There's not really a lot that hasn't been told in the headlines. Essentially, from that point moving forward, everything that was in the news, because this was a very public thing, and it still is a very public thing. Everything that was in the news was news to us as well, and we ended up not getting any communication from that point on, at least from at the time our current CEOs. And I understand, like at that point, like you're in legal hot water, and so one side of me understands that. There's another side that would have loved to have been communicated with after that. The public was finding out everything at the same time that we were, and that was hard. That was hard, because obviously friends and family, like the next morning, are like, "Oh my God, I just saw the news. Is this true? Are you okay? Like, what's going on?" And I don't have any more information for you than what you've already seen.
Yeah. So I'm just I'm curious about like how what's transpired or what's become of that for you personally. You know, I'm sure that everybody's stories of there probably be people that are still at this point like freaking out, like don't know what to do, can't pay rent, and all these other things. But how has that been for you? I know that you shared a little bit of your heart in the stories you've created for that, but what tangibly like are you recovering from that from from a an income perspective now, and what's now the steps that you've taken after?
Yeah.
What's post Bitwise life now for you?
Yeah. So if I'm being completely authentic, I and honest, leading up to this year and at the start of this year, I found myself coming back to a 9 to 5 and a W-2 job and working for somebody else after being self-employed was a bit of an experiment. And and so I found myself at the beginning of this year thinking, well, what's my next move? Because this for me is fantastic and is a great place to be, and it's not without its imperfections by no means. Like this place obviously wasn't perfect. However, for me personally, I'd always wanted to come back to owning my own business. And so when everything happened, I was already of that mindset. I wasn't about to leave that week. So in effect, what this did was it just pushed my timeline up. And there was a sense of relief for me because this was something that I had grappled with, like, how are we going to do this as far as like how are we going to adjust for the income for my own household, and what does that mean? Can we do this? Should we do this? And if I really feel like this is something in my heart that I want to do, what's the timeline that I need to be able to make this happen? Well, then the universe was like, well, guess what? You're going to get a push for this. And so after all the practical things of making sure that we were going to be okay as far as covering our bills and things like that were taken care of, then I could kind of turn to, well, okay, I got essentially what I wanted in a rather tumultuous way, but what do I do from here, and where do I go? And to be completely honest, that is still a question that I'm asking myself as far as what that I want to do. I have these skills as far as being a marketer and knowing how to do those things and how to create videos and how to take photos, and but it's more than just creating pretty looking films and photos, but how to use that as far as a business and how to market a product or a service or to bring brand awareness to a brand or an individual. And so I don't necessarily have like an exact direction right now. I'm still trying to kind of sift that out. I ended up filing a business license for the city that I'm currently in and got that approved. And so now I'm kind of coming back to freelance, and it's been a bit of fresh air for me to be able to be a creative again. And in a sense, despite how stressful that this has been, it's also been exactly what I needed, I think, in this moment. Sure, there's a ton of financial issues that this has brought. However, as far as like what the future and what the picture is of what I want my life to look like, I feel there's a part of me that's a lot happier now. And I feel a lot more aligned with the direction that I'm going. And so I'm kind of falling back into being freelance and also thinking about business and what the next move is there, as far as maybe starting another business, maybe trying to help and create solutions for people who want to start businesses, and using some of the experience and the knowledge that I have to essentially help others.
I want to talk a little bit more about that idea now moving into is sort of a space of having sort of now another bank of influences, another bank of another whole database of experiences now, and I'm sure that's kind of elevated your perspective a little bit too. But I want to talk about just this idea of I think more so as of recently, just kind of being in the in now as pursuing this podcast thing, just being a little bit more aware of branding and things like that as well. I really love this idea of the authentic photographer, and I want to talk about what that means to you, and can you elaborate a little bit on that sort of concept as a brand?
Yeah. So that name I had gone back and forth with for a very long time. So for context, this name came from I've sat on this for like, I don't know, it's probably been 6 or 7 years. And I don't even originally remember what the impetus was for that particular name. But in this moment, that name is born out of essentially how I got my start in creativity, being that photography for me was about being authentic and being honest and expressing and articulating how I felt in that moment of stress and anxiety. But that has changed and evolved as I've gotten older. And the element of being honest and being authentic and telling stories that align with my own experiences and the things that resonate with me, whether it's, we talked kind of earlier, I think, off mic, about potentially working with former Bitwise employees and telling their stories, because those are stories that may and likely will never be told unless somebody reaches out to them. And there will probably be a documentary at some point. I've already heard things of people wanting to make documentaries, and whether or not I make a documentary is still a question mark. But I'm just interested in telling those types of stories. There was a yoga instructor who I worked with. Shout out to Crystal if she listens to this.
Shout out Crystal.
She is without a doubt one of the most fantastic yoga instructors in the Central Valley. But her and I, very, very early on, this was like, if not my first kind of video filmmaking project, it was definitely one of my first. We sat down and I had taken a yoga class with her, with my wife, and we just kind of like, when you meet somebody and you just know like this is somebody who's special, like they have a story, and I'm interested in hearing that. And so her and I sat down and I heard her story, and she had gone through a period of, after having a child, she had gone through postpartum depression, and it had really affected her, but it also had given her a level of compassion and empathy that she was then able to to translate into her yoga practice. And you could see that other people could feel that. Maybe they couldn't identify it, but other people could feel it. And so I wanted to work with her and make a story. And so we made this kind of cool little film. There's no dialogue or anything in it, but it's just essentially like her doing a yoga practice and this kind of moody soundtrack that had come from an artist that I was really into at the time. And I reached out and didn't think that he was going to give us permission to use it, but they ended up miraculously giving us the permission to use it. And so we created this kind of really emotional video about the loss of my grandmother. But a lot of people can interpret it a lot of different ways because it's kind of ambiguous. And that was something that I think really resonated with me in that moment and kind of set the stage for what I want to do. And I know it's the authentic photographer. We're talking about filmmaking. The technicality there, photo and video, is really what I'm interested in, but it's really all about like people's authentic stories.
Yeah.
And then also too, maybe along the way, I can help others to find a way to express what they're going through photography or through filmmaking.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that what I've come to discover in a lot of ways is I find such personal growth and personal like value in seeing others pursue their own set of ambition and other ways that they try to have an outlet as well. I find such like value in seeing others pursue their passions as well, and maybe that's an intention for you. But one of the things that I'm very encouraged by is just you trying to do that with yourself as well. I don't know if Christopher Nolan goes out and sets to say like, I hope I inspire other filmmakers at this magnitude or whatever, or if he just does that because that's really what he's passionate about as well. And you being inspired by someone else's passion is the same way that's being evident through what you're doing in your pursuit as well. So I'm encouraged by that, and I hope that others are as well in that same way.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I got a message today, I think it might have been yesterday, but somebody saying a very similar thing. And I think that especially artists today need to hear that. It was a good reminder for me because, I mean, today on social media, like as soon as you open up Instagram or TikTok, you're bombarded with a million different stimulus and there's so many things, people trying to teach you stuff and people trying to sell you things, promoting things. And this person had tuned into, it was actually I had posted an Instagram reel about that I talked about earlier about kind of processing all the feelings of losing my job, being laid off and all of that. And they responded to that in a private message and said, I love this. This is fantastic. You're not trying to sell me anything. You're not promoting anything. This is just you being authentic.
Yeah.
And it kind of hit me in that moment because like as an artist, that's all that I want. That's all that I want to do. And if I've done that for even one person, and a lot of times I have to remind myself, like if I even impact one person, like that's incredible. And because the business side of me is like, well, I would love for this to get 100,000 views.
Yeah.
And I would love to get obviously paid a substantial amount of money to do that. But I think if that is the motivator, that people can really feel that.
Sure.
And if in contrast, if you truly believe in something, I want to believe that people can see that and people will identify with that and that should be enough.
It's ironic in the concept of like social media influencers because like the whole motive for that is not maybe not to influence others, but to be to monetize the reach, in that way. And I'm sure as a creative, as a person that is is creating content, it's hard to like live in that sort of, duality of worlds in that way.
It 100% is. And especially like being the age that I am, like I was able to see kind of Instagram come up and to see what it was in the beginning, to see how it's evolved. And initially, like people were just posting photos from their iPhone. And then somebody had the idea like, well, I'm a photographer and I take professional pictures or like pictures with a nice camera. Like, why don't I post that? And then that took off. And then you saw a lot of like these travel photos. You saw a lot of like small people, big landscape type of thing. And those were super popular. And now to see how it's evolved into reels and into video, and even more like it's essentially a business now where, okay, every time that I try and post something, I'm thinking, my business mind is thinking, what value is this providing to other people?
Yeah.
Because that's what a business is. Like and this is the business side of me talking, that people, in some sense, like either are wanting entertainment, they're wanting usefulness, utility out of the content that they're seeing. Maybe it's been a long day and you just kind of want to veg out and you just want entertaining humor, or you want to see like 7 Dachshunds running around
something cute,
a backyard, because it's been a stressful day and the world is full of stress. But it's about what value am I providing? And then there exists art on the other side where it's like artists, people who are trying to express what they're going through. And that I think does provide value to people. But for artists, it's kind of hard for us, I think, to see that in this world of like, I'm not selling anything. Like I could post about my gear and that's useful. And sometimes I'm interested in doing that. And other times I'm interested in talking about like, how are you doing mentally? How are you doing psychologically? These are these emotions that I'm feeling. This is what they look like. Are people interested in that? And it's easy to get down on yourself and to think that they aren't. But I think that it does provide value in the way where, very similar to like how we listen to music.
Yeah.
Like maybe you don't identify with all of the words and all of the lyrics, but it resonates with you on a level where it sounds like how you feel or how you felt at a time in your life. And we need that.
I 100% agree with you. I'm gonna press a red button here because I want to talk about like as the artist side of things, and you touched on this early on, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. But like this achiever mindset, this perfectionism mindset, I would imagine if I'm, so for me, this is a personal struggle of mine. When I don't write a lot of music these days as much anymore. But, in the past when I've done that and I like shared something with someone and I asked their opinion on it, and they like have any sort of critique, in my mind, I'm like, well, you just don't get it. You don't get what I was trying to portray in this, in that way. So I can only, especially you, that being that, you've created a lot more content than I have at that. Does that play into like this perfectionism? Do you like sit on something for a long time before you actually release it? How does that look for your brain?
For me, perfectionism ends up showing up in the way where I have this idea and then I immediately think about everything that it would take to make that idea perfect, essentially, how it lives in and how it looks in my brain. And then I'm like, holy shit, like that is a fucking mountain. And I don't know if I want to do all that work. And so in reality, maybe you end up seeing 10%, and that's probably being generous, maybe 5% of all of the ideas I ever have. Why am I hesitant with these ideas? Oh, well, because it's not going to provide enough value to people, because it's not going to get any views. People aren't going to be interested in that. People are going to critique it, maybe. Maybe I even make it past that first step. For me, it's from 0 to 1 is the hardest step. But it sounds like for you, maybe it's from 1 to 10, and you started it, and in that space, maybe there's critique in there, and you're like, oh, man, why? Like you just don't get it, kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe it's also like I should have thicker skin in a lot of ways too, So yeah, I tend to I'm a classic people pleaser, and in that way, when someone tells me I am not pleased by this, it shakes my world up, you know? And so like I struggle with that, but I know it's a personal dilemma. I know it's a personal thing that's maybe not, I shouldn't project that upon others in the same way.
There's a book that if anybody who knows me personally, I probably have recommended this to them, but it's a book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And it's essentially, for a very long time, it was like my creative Bible. And she talks about, I'm probably going to butcher this, but she talks about caring about your idea like so much in the process of creating it. And then the moment that you share it, because sharing is a part of the creative process. And this is kind of controversial in and of itself. Like, do you need to share something like of your own art? And that's a question that I think you could probably go either way. I personally think that you do. And the moment that you share it, then just releasing it, and you've cared about this thing and it was your baby. And now that you've posted it, you've had an art gallery or you've shared it to then kind of release it and let people do whatever that they're going to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Something that came to mind, you said it early on and it hasn't left me since. And it actually kind of, I would say kind of full cycle goes into the sort of the elements of kind of the career path you've taken, the way you navigate situations and things like that now. But we talked early on about like as men having sort of this difficult time with expressing emotions and things like that as well. And for you, that's been kind of a really good opportunity for you to put that thought or express that way through video and film. Sorry, you're hearing my son express his emotions in the background there too.
Perfect timing.
Actually, so as a matter of fact, I'm really happy that, so my son, I have a 5-year-old that's he's in kindergarten now, but in preschool last year, there's not a ton of like academic stuff one can learn in preschool, but they really focused on having them be expressive in their emotions, which is kind of a breath of fresh air, to be quite honest. It's pretty good to know that that's being taught, or at least try to express in that way, because I think as men, and for me, historically, even though I'm a third generation American, there's a sort of an element, an underlying machismo that comes with like being a Hispanic man in that way. Totally. And stuff too. So it's kind of historically hard for us as men to express that, but how has that been for you now that you're able to sort of maybe even identify that now? How has that been impactful for your relationships and just you as in your adult life now too?
I kind of don't have a choice, to be honest, as far as me personally. And what I mean by that is that if I don't express my emotions, I mean, I say this in my head and I'm like, well, duh, like this just doesn't apply to just me. But if I don't express my emotions, then anxiety, stress, but it doesn't just mean that, like, and it doesn't just show up that way. It shows up in me eating out a little bit more. It shows up in me spending more time on social media. It shows up in me maybe not going to the gym as much. Emotions are just a part of, if anything about my life has taught me anything, that our human experience is just about emotions. We can't get rid of them. And I don't think that we should by any means, but for some reason, men are supposed to. Mm-hmm. And that comes from a lot of different places, from a lot of different conditioning, whether it's to be masculine, to be a man, is to be a provider. We need to be strong, and strong looks like not having emotions and not breaking down ever. But in reality, it's quite the opposite. Like, strength comes from having those emotions and being able to go through them and to show your children and your wife, your partner, whoever that is, that you can be vulnerable. Because if you don't, then you end up coping by doing all those things that I listed. And that's how you get into things like addiction, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, it could be porn, it could be a number of different things. But either way, like, your emotional drainage, your emotional plumbing in yourself is clogged up.
Yeah.
And so like, why would we expect anything else other than like a negative to come from something like essentially denying who we are?
Yeah, that's beautiful in concept. And I think that a message that, this whole podcast was stemmed from the idea of just a necessity of an outlet in that same way. I think, and so for me personally, it's been that there's been so many conversations that I've had, so many feelings that I've had as of late that have just been at the forefront of my thinking and my desire to have these conversations with others as well in the same way, and namely with men because there's just a lot of unsaid things that happen with men, and in a lot of ways, when we get together, we talk about football, we talk about all these other things, and it's seldom that we get the outlet, especially like there's so much weight on the things that are around us today, with the influences that like I I say this with a sort of a grain of salt because I work remotely, I work at home, and I work a tech job. And so a lot of friends, a lot of people that I've kind of grown up with, or historically, dad and uncles and things like that have been blue collar workers. And so in their opinion, they're just like, you've got the cushiest job, you don't do anything, you like, you're why do you stress about anything? But on the contrary, like my mind is so mentally flooded that I feel more stressed than I do. My outlet is I can go to the yard and do the yard because like I can shut my brain off and do something
Yeah.
manual.
Yep.
And so that's sort of the I need this outlet to be able to have these conversations with people. And I'll say that that's a personal kind of like necessity for me in such a way. And thank you for being vulnerable enough to kind of like nudge that in that same direction because I 100% agree with you is that like when you plug up the outlets, it just gets backed up, and that is reflective in so many other ways. There's a tell old sign of like dad being a harsh, hard ass kind of person that doesn't do these things because historically they didn't have the expressive outlet in that same way. And so I'm glad that these are sort of happening now from millennials like us and things
Yeah.
like that are and hopefully for the next generation of people as well.
Yeah. I mean, if I grew up, like you said, like your kids in preschool are being encouraged to express their emotions. Like if I grew up with just someone telling me like it's okay to be sad, it's okay to cry. Like how many times have you been in a store, have you been somewhere and you hear a parent telling their kid to not cry? And and it's not that, well, you're a terrible parent. It's just that when we know better, we do better.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have that knowledge of like what that could do to a kid or what the opposite could do, I mean, I full disclosure, I don't have kids. I was once a kid, so that's where I'm coming from. And as like a highly sensitive person, as a kid who was that like kid who felt everything and like was at a sleepover and with his friends and playing and roughhousing and then crying because it was too rough. Like I remember thinking like, is there something wrong with me? Because nobody else is like this. Nobody else is crying and I'm not supposed to cry. But if I had somebody to tell me like, this is okay, like it's okay, then maybe how much faster would I have gotten to being a creative?
Mm-hmm.
How much less suffering would I have gone through? How many panic attacks would I have not had? Kind of thing. And I'm not regretting any of that because that's part of my journey. It has given me the compassion and empathy to be able to be there for those people and maybe for my kids one day. But if we can do it in the beginning, like, man, how many kids could we save? Like this gets into such a bigger issue, but how many people's lives could be impacted? How many men could be saved? And just people in general.
Yeah, I mean, maybe on the opposite side of the spectrum, because that's very much encouraged with little girls and girls in general today. It's like, and I envy it sometimes because girls will come, women will go to each other and say like, can you, let's just cry and hug it out together in that same way. And they've got this outlet. For men, it's kind of like they're there, pat, pat, you're good, on the back. And in a lot of ways, I'm not requiring that of others, but just the mere fact of like being able to like come to the point of like vulnerability and brokenness and all these things, I think there's such value in those sort of relationships and being able to do as well, and to not be judged by it too.
I probably consciously don't remember saying I love you to my dad until I was in my 20s. And these days now, like, life's too short. Like, a lot of life has happened in there, and maybe it's been the loss of family members or seeing your own mortality in myself, and my dad has seen that, and that has changed, and I absolutely love that. And to be able to see in my own friendships, like in the guy friends that I have, and everybody at this point, like in life, is across the country. They're in different states. They have careers and they're starting families, and that's fantastic. And for us to hang out and then for them to leave and be like, "I love you, man." Like, just that, I think we don't bat an eye at it. It's normal for us. But the David 10 years ago, even, like, man, how significant is that? And how many, sure, some people don't express themselves in that way, and that's okay. But how many people want to and don't?
Yeah, there's so much unsaid, at that point. It's sort of a, it's a yearning or longing in that same way. And to go back to your earlier point, when it leads to something else that takes the place of like, having these expressive outlets in that way, then it leads to the alcoholism. It leads to the addictions and things like that as well. And only then you get sort of like this true vulnerable person, and almost a detriment though it's sometimes, because you're so like broken at that point. Like, it's easier to say I love you, man, when you're shit faced, like when you're drunk, but so it's almost a level of vulnerability. But like if that's the pattern, it's like the behavior every single day, there's really no value in it. Like, yeah, they're there, I know you love me, or whatever it is, but like, so having the almost being proactive to get to that point before you hit to a level of like involuntary vulnerability is tremendously valuable and healthy, in my opinion.
Yeah, involuntary vulnerability. Yep, love that.
I don't know if that's a concept or what that means, but it just came to my mind, thinking about that, because when your inhibitions are lessened and all these other things, it's almost a forceful way to be expressive in that sense,
Totally.
But we talked about like what it would be to go drunk to a therapy session, how crazy or healthy that would be. I don't know. Who knows? Who's to say?
Right. I know that. So you got the science in me like going, because part of therapy is all about like neuroplasticity and rewiring of the brain. And I wonder how readily that happens while under the influence of alcohol, or if alcohol like interferes with that process. I'm not in the science world enough to know, like, but I'm just curious. Like, I wonder if that is a thing. Like, maybe it would just prevent that process from happening, or
For sure.
or cause it to happen at a slower rate.
The last hot button topic thing that I want to talk about is, so peek behind the curtain. I sent you some questions, kind of topical and things like that, just to kind of chew on a little bit. We haven't even we didn't get to a lot of those.
I know.
But there is one that always kind of is at the forefront of my mind, because specifically the reason why is because you talked about like these really harsh things and ways that people kind of turn to as an alternative solution to their problems in that way. But I was curious about, for you personally, what's the guiding, what is your anchor? What is your North Star? What do you turn to for stability in such a way?
I think as a man, it's important for me to say this up front. I go to therapy. These days, it's not as regularly as I used to, but I honestly consider that like my ace in my back pocket, even if it's under circumstances where like I don't have anything to talk about. Like, I'm not I'm not going through something super traumatic. And a lot of times I think people in general just think that like, well, therapy is reserved for really, really traumatic situations and experiences in life. And that's not the case. It's just the same like you take your car for regular maintenance, and if you don't, then obviously you start to see problems with your car. Well, why wouldn't you do that with your mind?
Yeah.
And like to me, as far as the priority list, like my car is pretty high up there because if I lose that, then like I can't get from A to B. But my body and my mind and my heart, like those are easily way higher priorities than my car is.
Absolutely.
So why is it so hard for us to kind of change that mindset and to be able to prioritize ourselves and to see a therapist? So therapy for me is like that's a big one that I feel like I need to say so that others out there who may be on the fence are like, you know what, I need to.
Yeah.
But there's a ton of other things. Like I have a whole routine now. As somebody who has been through multiple periods of like high anxiety and stress in their life, like I have essentially been given the opportunity multiple times to figure out like what is it exactly that I need in that moment. And I guess the short list is that it comes down to like literal basics, and this is the science in me, but literal basics like, am I eating well? Am I drinking enough water? Am I getting enough sleep? And then aside from that, exercise. Like this sounds super basic, but exercise is just like a way to bulletproof yourself, and not just physically but mentally. Like the impacts that have mentally, I think are far more beneficial than they are physically.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. It gives you it creates so many like rhythms and patterns and things that is very necessary for that. In the same way like diet and things like it helps you, obviously with the physical outcomes that you're hoping for as well, but the like just the commitment, the things that the intangible things that go along with that are probably, to your point, it's probably exactly more beneficial in that regard as well.
Yep. I do want to say, like, for the other perfectionists out there, that at one point, once I discovered my routines, like, oh, I can't eat fast food ever. I can't ever miss a workout. I can't ever miss meditation, which is one I didn't even talk about. But meditating is just fantastic. But I list all these things off, and maybe you don't do any of these things. Like I didn't just wake up one day after having a panic attack and then start all of them and then keep all of these habits. It was a slow kind of burn. And even then, like they ebb and flow. Some weeks I eat fast food. Like I fucking love fast food. And my wife is gonna just be in the comments about this and she can corroborate all of this. But sometimes too much. But like that's the point. Like it's not just a straight line where you have to adhere to these things so strictly. It is an ebb and flow. Some weeks you're better, and some weeks you're not as good as you were last week. And then you find your way back. And it's just really about what do you need, at least for me, what do I need in that moment? And maybe it's meditating, maybe it's movement and exercise for me. Like I love rock climbing. And maybe I need more of that this week. Maybe I need a therapy session this week. And it's just an ebb and flow. Like you don't need to adhere to everything perfectly.
It's peaks and valleys, and it's also not a one size fits all solution in that same way too. Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the things that make me make up who I am as well. There's I grew up with faith and things like that as well, but that's not for everyone. In the same way that some people literally, they've got a gluten deficient or problem with gluten and things like that, so they can't have the fast food that we have. So it's not a templatized solution for everyone. There can be elements of things that are beneficial in so many different ways as well. And so, yeah, I'm always curious about like the things that are helpful for you because they can be helpful for others. Maybe that they're not thinking of that in the same way as well. One more question for you that I'm just kind of curious about, like because you had this really incredible journey of just like self-discovery through your career path and things like that as well. If you could tell your younger self, if you can go back to like some of the things that maybe you've thought of, I'll give you. I'm gonna filibust for a little bit and things like that. But if you can tell your younger self some advice, or maybe a young person that's potentially thinking about taking a path into the same something similar to you, do you have any advice or any warnings, anything that you potentially would have wanted to hear as well? I'll give you a second to chew on that if you need to.
Yeah, I think I mean, being who I am, I immediately go to like the emotional side of it. And I would say there's nothing wrong with you. Everything that you think is wrong with you and makes you weird and makes you different in a bad way are beautiful things about what make you unique. And that there's nothing wrong with you. A lot of people who, myself included, I mean, really, I'm talking to myself, that with anxiety and with being a creative, like you're different. You're different. And this is not a unique story. Like this is a very, at least in my experience, like you hear this story a lot. But that being different is so hard, especially when you're young.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you're young and in high school and even younger than that, being different is like social suicide in some instances. And really, like those things are what make you beautiful, and your lovability is not tied into being like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe those things may even make you successful in the ways that you want. And success has a different picture for everyone. Like it looks differently for every person. Some people define it by money. Some people define it by happiness. But I think that that's what I would say. And then for practically speaking, like being a creative is hard. Owning a business is hard. It's cool to have seen photography become such a cool thing now with Instagram and social media. Like that's cool to have been a creative person, like an artist, somebody who draws, or a photographer back in like, I don't know, the mid 90s and the early 2000s wasn't as cool as it is now. Now it's like, oh, you're a YouTuber? That is freaking awesome. Like, I love that. And even these days, though, like being in your 30s for me and being a YouTuber, I always think like, am I too old for this kind of thing? But in reality, like you're never too old for anything. If you fucking love it, then you should do it. Ultimately, like it's your life, and no one makes it out alive. Like not to go completely doom and gloom, but it's your life and you should do what you want. As long as you're not harming anyone, you're not harming yourself, go fucking live your life.
Well said. Beautifully said. You've inspired me to give it all up and to move to Alaska and to become a deep sea fisherman.
Right? But that's the other thing too, is like the whole follow your passion kind of deal. And a lot of people see that image of like, you got to drop everything, sell everything, and move to India or move out of the country. But it could literally be like a curiosity. Maybe it's just going and picking up a camera and taking a picture because you always wanted to do it, but you don't think that you can. And it's just like that baby step. Not everybody's going to be Ansel Adams or Beethoven or Mozart, but who cares? Like if it brings you joy, then you should do it.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be an eat, pray, love situation where you have this, profound epiphany of thought or something that is, so huge. What do you call it? I'm trying to think of the word. Oh, I'm gonna butcher it. But like such a high magnitude situation where it's at. But it could be just as simple as like little joy. It could be podcasting. That's been such a creative outlet for me. That's just been like, I know there's a million podcasts out there, but having this outlet has just been really like therapeutic and beautiful. And so Yeah, I mean, I'm really encouraged by that, and I really hope that others are encouraged by your story, and I'm really grateful. Thank you for your time. You've been really generous of that. Do you have anything currently in the works that you want to promote, plug, talk about, or give us a peek into the maybe a potential project or something going on with you?
I mean, to be honest, like I came in and I think I had you'd asked me that question and I did write something, but being completely honest and authentic today, like I'm still trying to discover what that direction is. Like I have a vague idea of where I want to go, but I'm just being open to that. And part of me walked in here wanting to like put that image out to people that like I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly where I'm going. I have a fucking plan and I'm going to do all that. And the truth is that I don't.
Yeah.
And I think that is for me to like have this title of the authentic photographer to my own detriment means that I need to be honest about things like that. And so the one thing that I know is like I love photography. I need it. I need an art practice. And so I'm going to tell people's stories and just focus on like doing whatever it is that I love in that moment and that brings me joy.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing some joy today with this conversation here today. And at the very least, follow one online. Plug your socials. You know, anything that you want. I'll probably add a little intro outro here to tag you into all your socials. But yeah, man, thank you for stopping by and just being generous with your time and just this conversation, man. I'm really happy we got a chance to shoot the shit.
Yeah.
Have a Negroni and talk about real stuff.
Of course. Thank you, my friend. Like, honestly, the Negroni was fantastic. Like, I know that you were like qualifying it earlier, but it was good, even minus the orange twist. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the time and all the effort that you put into this. So
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.